Right. So as people are coming in, I just want to get started and to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you for being here for our town hall on distance learning for the next school year. I'm Lindsay Gotanda. I'm the Deputy Superintendent for the school district, and I'm lucky to be here with Dr. Trista Ramirez, who is our coordinator of student mental health and student services, and our current intermediate distance learning principal, Mr. Mike Leholt, who has been working really hard this year and partnering with us in this presentation so that we can answer all of the questions about what this program could look like for next year. So with that, I actually wanted to remind everyone we do have a Q&A at the bottom. We don't have a chat that is open to everyone. If you'd like to chat the panelists, you can. Otherwise, all questions will be in the Q&A at the bottom. And the way that the Q&A works, you'll type your questions in. They are visible to everyone. So just so you know, they're visible to everyone who's in the webinar. And we will either answer them live or we will answer them by typing the answer into the answers portion. Additionally, we have created a frequently asked questions on our PVPUSD website. And so you're welcome to look at the frequently asked questions if there's any questions that you might have that may have been unanswered tonight or if you missed it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Leholt.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate everybody being here tonight. Like Dr. Gotanda said, my name is Mike Leholt. I'm the principal for the Distance Learning Academy for grades 6 through 8 this year. And we currently have over 700 students that are enrolled in our academy. Just to start, just a big shout out to our teachers, our staff, and our administration for this past year. It's been a challenging year, but with that, they've put together just wonderful programs that our students have been extremely successful in. And it's a testament to that we're hearing a demand for this to continue into next year. And so with that said, what you're going to see tonight is we're going to run through some different options for our elementary students and for our intermediate students as students come back for next year. So let's start with some of our, with what next year is going to look like. And so PVPUSD is going to open for full-time, 5-day-a-week in-person learning. We're moving back to a very traditional schedule at our schools for the start of the 2021 school year in August. With the success of our DLA programs and our independent study programs for this past year, as well as the interest, like I mentioned, that our communities had, we're looking at some alternate options for our students. And at elementary, you can see on the screen in front of you, that would be a K-5 distance learning program, a K-5 independent study, or a 6-8 distance learning program. And we'll go through each of those. First, we'll start with our K-5 independent study. Independent study is not a live instruction program. You have a PVPUSD teacher that is assigned to you. That teacher will assign material and will be able to monitor our students. All the material, and you'll hear me say this multiple times, but all the material will be district adopted curriculum. So if you were in a traditional setting and you were working, let's say in a third grade math class, and they'd be using Math in Focus, that would be the same for our independent study program. Weekly updates are provided to our parents, and students are graded on a trimester basis, and we'll continue to have parent conferences. Family involvement is a really key component to success in the independent study. Things like daily monitoring, establishing a schedule, and setting up a good work routine are key for our students to be successful in this. And there are some meeting times here. And right now, this is pending some current legislation, but you can anticipate that students will be meeting with their teacher from somewhere between 1 and 3 hours weekly. Those meetings could be broken up. They could be one-on-one or they could be group. They would likely be in person. There may be some potential for virtual meetings. If they are virtual meetings, one of the things that's really important is that our students are in like a very focused learning environment. They're not, sitting in the back of the car at Trader Joe's on a parent's cell phone or, in the gondola headed to the top of Mammoth, things like that. We want our students in a healthy environment that's focused where they can, be one-on-one with their teacher or in group, maybe for an assessment and things like that. So.
And if I may share, the governor's budget revise was very clear around independent study and that they are going to be changing the legislation to ensure that students who are on independent study actually have to show participation and engagement in their schoolwork daily. So that actually was in a presentation that I saw today. And that doesn't mean that they're meeting with the teacher every single day, but they have to be actually showing proof of engaging in work every single day. And part of that is because many of the students outside of PVPUSD throughout the state who may have been on independent study were not getting that engagement with their teacher and or the monitoring that they need to have.
So the next thing that we're going to look at is the K-5 distance learning program. And this was a program that was offered this year. Again, a lot of success behind this one. This is live instruction every school day with our teachers. It would be a blend of synchronous instruction, asynchronous instruction, and small group. And what you should anticipate for this is, if you're thinking about like kind of timeframes for planning, anticipate all of those things being broken up into blocks throughout a traditional school day. So you're consider a traditional school day timing, and then blocks of time for students learning synchronously with their teacher, having time for asynchronous work, and then a variety of small group instruction. PE will be continued to be offered through a virtual platform for this. And then our PVPUSD teachers will be using district adopted curriculum, and our platform that we use for all of these programs will be a Google-based platform. And I'll speak a little bit more to Google on one of our technology slides. We'll follow all of our traditional grading windows. And while this is distance, there could be times where we have students required to come to campus for in-person assessments. And these might be things like our LPAC test, which is for our English learner students, potentially state testing, possibly diagnostic or summative assessments as well.
And if I may add, for our distance learning program, so this is for K-5 and through 6-8, all of this is dependent upon enrollment. And so if we do not have enough students to have a robust distance learning program, then we could default to independent study depending on the numbers. The numbers that we had this year allowed us to have a standalone distance learning program for intermediate. Students had a very wide array of elective options, but it was because the numbers of students who chose distance learning supported all of that staffing. And so in looking at this, as we start to have parents make that choice through their Aries portal, which we'll talk about later, what that does is it indicates to us how we're going to be able to staff this. And so I want to be very clear and transparent that should we not get the enrollment in order to sustain the staffing, we would have to default into either an independent study program, or if, for example, in 6-8, because of credentialing, it's potential that we would not be able to offer a distance learning program that's live instruction because we wouldn't have the numbers to sustain an actual class worth of students, let's say for the 7 levels of math that we offer in intermediate.
So if we do have the enrollment, here's what a 6-8 distance learning program would look like. This would actually look really similar to what it does this year. And once again, kind of super proud of the work that everybody's done behind the scenes on this to put this together this year. It would be live instruction every school day, 6 class periods. So math, language arts, science, social studies, elective, and PE. We would work again to find a nice balance between synchronous and asynchronous instruction. And when you think about planning in the windows of a traditional school day and what the intermediate traditional schedule looks like. And then what we would do is be able to build that out with this type of instruction and possibly even something like office hours. Student supports at the intermediate level, we would mimic what we have on our campuses. So things like administration, counselors, school psychologists, SAGE services. Just like elementary, everything would be taught through PVPUSD teachers using our district adopted curriculum, and our platform would be Google Classroom. The electives, and this kind of goes to what Dr. Gotanda said, in addition to the program, depending upon enrollment, we could have some limited elective options. And then the other thing is we could also require some in-person testing, very similar to the elementary, where it could be something for state testing, for EL testing, diagnostics, or summative assessments.
So really quick, Mr. Leholt, let me just answer a couple of questions that came up in the Q&A. So regarding numbers, so if we don't have enough numbers for a K-5 DLA, absolutely, you could go back to your in-person on-campus learning at your home school. The other question was about commitment. So has any consideration been given only requiring a commitment until the younger children can be vaccinated? Many parents will feel more comfortable sending their kids after they are fully vaccinated, which is expected in late fall after school starts. So at this point, I think we're going to talk a little bit about the commitment, but we definitely want to make sure that folks know that this is intended to be an option for alternative learning. And I know that while there's many families who are still, concerned or wary about sending their students back to school, it may not, and we're going to talk about this later, be a requirement that all students are vaccinated. And so if a family chooses to have their child vaccinated, that doesn't necessarily mean that the other students will be vaccinated per se, nor does it mean that all of our staff is vaccinated. Right now, vaccinations are under emergency authorization. And so employers like PVPUSD will not be requiring that at this time. And then if we cannot sustain a distance learning program because we don't have the numbers, we will contact each family who has indicated in areas that they're interested. And so that way, as soon as we know, then we can say, okay, we're going to do an independent study option, or you can go back to your homeschool and we can, discuss what the different options are and weigh those out with you.
Well, when we're looking at an independent study or a distance learning program, we know that it's worked this year for a lot of our students. But the truth is that for some students, virtual learning doesn't work. We know that our students all have different types of learning styles. And I think as you start to consider these alternate programs, definitely consider that. Consider your child's learning style and look at, were they successful this past year? And if they were successful, why were they successful? And if they weren't, they may be better served by by attending in-person instruction. And so if you look at the expectations on this slide, they're really imperative for success in the program. And those are things like students being in a distraction-free learning environment with their camera on and being visible on screen, monitoring all of their daily platforms, checking their email daily. And then also, and this is a really important one, and that's finding a healthy balance with activities outside of a school that don't involve a screen. And we'll talk a little bit about, homeschool activities as well, but making sure that students are active and participating in things if they are on screen all day. Because our teachers can't physically be in the home to create their classroom, it's important that we partner with our families differently when we're dealing with a virtual classroom. And so on the slide in front of you, what you can see are different family expectations that have led to success for our students this year. So these are things like, and I talk a lot about learning spaces, but creating learning spaces, monitoring your students, engaging with your kids daily about school, just asking about what's happening in each of your classes. And then again, providing opportunities for your kids to be able to have physical and social activities are some of the key components that are on this slide and have led to success for our students. Okay, platform and materials. So all of these programs will be Google-based platform, will be through a Google-based platform. And what that means is that students go through Google Classroom with their PVPUSD credentials. That means that as a parent, you can't log in with your Hotmail to go into your kid's class. You either go in with the PVPUSD credentials, but there's also other ways to monitor it through weekly summaries. Kids will have access to all of the Google Suite, which is like Google Meets, Google Docs, Google Slides, things like that. But students also have access through Office 365, and teachers utilize PowerPoint and Word. Teachers teach through either Google Meets or Zoom. Once again, district adopted curriculum, and then also supplemental software. And that's all software that's Board of Education approved. While a lot of our textbooks now are online, we would still continue to do sign-outs at all of our levels so students have hard copies of textbooks when they're available for their classes. And then just like this year, we've done sign-outs for different things like our STEM programs, our science experiments, art programs, for students to be able to have like physical manipulatives that make sense for each of those classes. And I'm gonna go into tech in a second, but as far as materials go, just like this year, Chromebooks would be available to be signed out at all levels as needed. So when you think about a virtual classroom, technology is your access to class, and then your learning space is your classroom. And the most important thing is to be able to access class. And the way to do that is obviously through some type of device. Chromebooks work great. Personal devices are fine as well. But again, Chromebooks can be signed out to all of our students. I think everybody on the Hill has dialed in internet this past year at a high rate, but obviously a reliable internet source. With that said, we have had a lot of people work around that when there are internet problems. One of the things that's been really successful is hardwiring directly to your modem. And then I know a lot of families have also used mesh systems to be able to kind of spread internet to harder to reach areas in their home. Students have found the use of headphones good for focus. And as I mentioned, having a clean, organized space dedicated for class is really important. We want our students, even if they're virtual, to have a routine, to get up, to shower, to eat breakfast, and then to go to a clean space to learn. Not like your iPhone goes off, and maybe I'm speaking more a little bit to intermediate, but your iPhone goes off, you roll over in bed and you open your Chromebook to be able to jump into class. Your bed is not a classroom. Just having a simple, clean space that's dedicated for attending class makes a big difference for kids. And while most of our stuff is done online, the ability to print is also beneficial, because as we found that students were on screen, one of the ways that teachers have been able to reduce screen time is by having students work off screen on, printed worksheets and things like that, or in a notebook, and then be able to upload or share photos of that work to share with the teacher. Attendance and engagement. To deliver instruction virtually, our teachers need to be able to interact with our students. So that means the students' cameras on, they're engaged, they're actively participating, and whether that's using a raise hand function, actually raising their hand, going into breakout rooms with other students for collaboration. And then, just like anything, completing their classwork daily, homework submission, and being on top of your work on a daily basis. Whether in person or virtually, it always takes a team for our students to be successful. And so the support and monitoring of a virtual classroom mimics what we would do in person. And so that's great PVPUSD teachers partnering with our families, making sure that you have that support from your administration and counseling staff and SAGE services at an intermediate level, a school psychologist, special education support, and then meetings as they're needed, parent conferences, meetings to support students, 504s, IEPs. A great way to monitor with Google is a Google Classroom Summary. As a parent, you can sign up for that. You get weekly updates. I do it with my own kids, and it gives me a quick snapshot of what's happening in their class, and also if there were any missing assignments or work that's coming up. Obviously, email communication between teachers, administration, and district, making sure that you're monitoring that. Newsletters from our school, and Aries, especially at intermediate, is a great way to keep an eye on grades and take a look if there are missing assignments. And then also being able to monitor your attendance through Aries. And we have an automated call system if students are out as well. So you might say to yourself, wow, that's a lot of great information, and I'm really ready to sign up for this program. And so the way that you would do that is the same way that you signed up for this town hall. You had a link in that email, and there is basically, you log into your Aries parent portal. On the left-hand side, you see a selection for student information. And after you click that, on the left-hand side again, school of choice requests. And a blue box will pop up, and it'll ask you to create a new request. And once you click that, there's a few simple fields that you fill out. And in those, there's a drop-down menu for K-5 independent, K-5 distance, or 6-8 distance. And then once you've clicked save, that means that you've signed up for it. It's actually a really simple process. And now we can go into our Q&A.
Okay, Mr. Lee Holt, we have some questions to get started with here. So one of the first questions for you or Dr. Gatanda is, will COVID-19 vaccines be mandated for teachers and for students upon return to the classroom?
I'm happy to take it.
Oh, okay, you can go for it.
I got it. So right now, what we've done for our teachers is all teachers in PVPUSD that have wanted the opportunity to be vaccinated, that's been offered to all of our teachers and staff throughout the district. And then also students have had the opportunity to start to sign up for vaccines if they're 12 or older through Beach Cities Health District. And then also I know that like myself personally, I emailed out information to the Distance Learning Academy about opportunities for vaccines through Torrance Memorial. Right now, as Dr. Gotana mentioned earlier, the state is not mandating that vaccines are not mandated for students or staff. And my understanding, and if I'm wrong, Dr. Gotana can speak, but my understanding is that we would follow state and Department of Public Health protocols in that situation.
Great, thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the health precautions that will happen on campus upon student return to school? Things like, will masks still be required for elementary students? Will they be required in middle school, even if kids and teachers are vaccinated?
A great question. So I'm going to talk a little bit about facilities, and then we'll go into kind of what the protocols look like. So our current facilities in the classrooms, the desks are spaced 3 feet apart per LA County Department of Public Health guidelines, and that's from center to chair of center to chair. In addition to that, we have a shield. It's a plastic shield on every desk. And it's required for desks that are less than 6 feet apart, but we have them on every desk, even if they are 6 feet apart, as a precaution. Additionally, we've been able to put an air purifier in every single classroom and office space that may not have working windows in those office spaces, or they don't have doors. So for example, a counselor's office, at an intermediate school may not have a door that leads to the outside. It's only an interior door. And so those offices also have air purifiers. Related to masks, it looks like it will be required that all students are wearing masks, both inside and outside. However, as those protocols get updated from the LA County Department of Public Health, we will follow those protocols that are required of schools. I do realize that there are a lot of businesses that are changing theirs based on the CDC guidelines. However, LA County Department of Public Health is what dictates what mask wearing looks like, as well as distancing. There will be a certain amount of social distancing that will be also required, but at this time we don't have those answers because as COVID-19 changes, the LA County Department of Public Health will guide us. Temperature checks or COVID testing routinely. So that's a great question. So temperature checks currently are not required, and neither is COVID testing routinely, only unless we get into a certain threshold for things like athletics. So at this time, there are some school sites that do temperature checks as part of their routine, but it is not required. It's just an additional precaution, if you will. As we know, going through this pandemic over the last almost year and a half now, there's many students and people who are asymptomatic who may not even have a temperature. So the temperature check, while it could catch, a few here and there, it's not going to present anything for asymptomatic, which I think is the reason why the COVID testing routinely question is coming up. And the answer to that is no, not at this time. Let's see. Any other questions on that before we move on to the questions that are in the chat?
I didn't see any other questions on health precautions for next year, but maybe Dr. Gatanda, I take that back. There was one question: if the district is still tracking and reporting positive cases, and will that continue during next school year?
A fantastic question. So the answer is yes. We have a COVID-19 dashboard. So you're able to see all of the positive cases in the schools as they come up. I will tell you that we have not had any transmission within our schools and at K through 8 since we've reopened. And so that has been actually really positive. We have had students who have been COVID positive and have come to school, and we've had to close classrooms down, but we have not had any linked cases to that. So what that indicates to us is that the transmission in the schools is very low. In addition to the PPE that we're using is actually very effective. So that has been actually very positive because we haven't had that transmission happening. We've seen some of it, and this is not specific to just PVPUSD, but they have seen some of it in youth sports, but not really, a circumstance for TK through 8 families.
Dr. Katanda, maybe while we're on this topic of upcoming school years, could you talk about whether or not DLA would be available for future years after this? Is this just for this coming school year? Kind of what is the plan for the district maybe moving forward?
So I think that the idea of an alternative option for families is something that we've talked about, for many years prior to the pandemic. And there are a number of districts who do have alternative learning programs available to students. And while they don't necessarily look like live instruction, it looks a little bit more like independent study or asynchronous with a teacher that is monitoring them. I can foresee that being a potential option, should we have the numbers to continue to sustain it.
And kind of similarly related to that, what will happen if students want to return in person for the 22-23 school year? Will they be allowed to return? Are they put on waiting lists with their home school? What does that look like for students who maybe choose to do this for next year, but then the year following?
I'm going to let Mr. Lehalt answer that question.
If you enroll in the distance learning or independent study program for this next school year, at the conclusion of that school year, what would happen is if you are elementary, you would return to your home school as long as there's space available in your grade level. If you are elementary and Cornerstone, you would be entered back into the lottery. And if you are intermediate, you would go back to your home school. And if you were an 8th grader and you were moving on to the high school is school of choice. So you would have your option of going to Peninsula or PV High.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Lehalt. Can you talk a little bit about if there will be a home base for the Distance Learning Academy and maybe a little bit of what that will look like?
So currently, we are based out of Malaga Cove at the district office. There would be a home base for the DLA, and it would be at a PVPUSD location. That hasn't been exactly determined yet.
Okay, great, thank you. And what about in terms of parent involvement in the Distance Learning Academy or Independent Study program? Will there be an opportunity for parents to be involved as volunteers in the PTA, anything like that?
We have, as a district, we've applied for a CDS, a county school district code. And if that is approved, then we can have a PTSA that's tied directly to the program. If not, and like similar to this year, what we've done is we've partnered with other PTSAs, but schools are always looking for parent involvement, and a lot of that's just going to be driven by like anything this evening, but a lot of that's going to be driven by our enrollment and our numbers of students.
Great, thank you. Mr. Lehalt, could you talk a little bit about how attendance is tracked through distance learning, through independent study? Are absences allowed? What does that look like for parents?
Well, attendance is going to be tracked the same way that it's been tracked in the past or tracked, through a traditional school. When students log on, our teachers mark a student either present, tardy if they show up late, or absent. And if we notice that there's any type of issues with attendance, generally you'll have counselors and administration reach out to you to be able to have a conversation and work through if there's anything that we can do to help support you. The state determines a student is chronically absent by definition from the state if they miss 10% or more of the school year, and that's at any point in the school year. So for instance, if we're 50 days into school and a student has missed 5 days of school, by definition, they're chronically absent. And those are situations where we definitely step in and try to help out and support and address it.
Great. So we're having some questions about elective options for our intermediate school folks on this call. So when would they be able to find out what elective options, would be available in the DLA? And if that student's choice isn't available, would they be able to choose to go back to their home school once they find out that that option isn't available to them?
The elective options are going to be heavily driven by enrollment. I'll let Dr. Gotanda jump in on the second part of that question, if they would have the option to go back.
Yes, I think what we need to do is we need to kind of look at the numbers, and then we can contact folks and just say, you know, we have enough to actually run a DLA, but the elective that you have requested is not offered. Here's what's available. I can definitely say that unless we have about 300 or more intermediate students, you know, we may not have a feasible model to actually offer distance learning. And I'm thinking 100 per grade level. And that being said, with 100 students per grade level, the elective options would be much more limited than should they have a, you know, a school of 700 or 900.
Mr. Leholt, could you address 8th grade students who typically take 0 period classes like world language, or maybe perhaps are in advanced math? For the DLA students, would that still be an option for them?
Yeah, you know, I've gotten this question before, and we started to talk a little bit about this to be able to find a way that we'd be able to support this for our students. If in a traditional school year, if a student is taking an 8th grade student is taking a certain class at the high school, the times when they take that class are during 0 period. So what happens is a student signs up, they're taking a 0 period at the high school, they're dropped off by their parent or carpool, and they attend class, and then they have first period off at the intermediate, and that allows them travel time to be able to get back to the intermediate school, and then they take periods 2 through 6. So 0 period and periods 2 through 6, that gets their 6 classes for the day. The way that we would be able to make that work for a distance program would mean that they would need to go in person to the high school to attend that class. And then we would do something very similar where their first period would be a free period. And then they would run the remainder of their classes with their academic classes and PE with periods 2 through 6.
Mr. Leholt, do you have any idea when the DLA school schedule might be available for parents to review before they choose? Or maybe this is a question for Dr. Gotanda. Do we know when that might be available for parents so they know that before they have to choose programs?
We'll probably be working on it in the next couple of weeks, but I will say that you can probably count on the schedule for intermediate looking very similar to what it was this year. And for elementary, probably very similar to a traditional school schedule with less instructional time, obviously, for the youngest learners, TKK, because they don't have the same amount of mandated minutes, but the minutes will look very similar to what they have in a regular school year.
Great, thank you. Mr. Leholt, can you address extracurricular activities, activities that after school activities, both intermediate school and elementary school, and a student's ability to access those?
Mm-hmm. Any student that's involved in one of these alternate programs that we've discussed today would be available to access after school activities through their home school. And so while you'd be enrolled with us, whatever your homeschool would have been this year, you'd be able to access activities there. So for instance, at the intermediate level, it could possibly be something like a booster club sport activity. At elementary, maybe if there's a movie evening, those would be things that you'd still be able to be a part of. The one part that you wouldn't would be lunchtime activities. And so those would be just for students that are on the campus.
Sorry, I muted myself and forgot to unmute. Apologize. Could you talk a little bit about the class max, student to teacher ratio, all of those things? Will they be different because this is a distance program? Are they the same that they would be in the regular school year in a traditional classroom? Can you talk a little bit about how that's set up, Mr. Leholt?
Sure. what we've done this year is what is my assumption that what we'll continue to do for the following years, and that is, we would run our virtual classrooms the same way that we run our traditional classrooms with our class sizes. And so, for instance, just as an example, our intermediate schools are staffed at 34-1 for our classes. And so while sometimes you may be in a class with less students, you might have a few more in some classes, but they'd be staffed the same way that they are for a traditional school.
Great. And at some of our elementary schools, the fifth graders might have more than one teacher on campus. Would that be the same thing in the Distance Learning Academy?
Our goal would be for each of our elementary students to be assigned to one teacher.
Okay. And what about your staff at the DLA? Would they be exclusive to distance learning? Would they also be sharing in-person classes on the campus? Would they be split between a different school?
I think this is one of those situations that goes back to the enrollment question. And what we're going to have to do is look at how the numbers come in. Ideally, for scheduling, it would be ideal if we were our own staff, but we'll have to look at the numbers and see what we can do that's in the best interest for our students and our community.
Okay. This year, I'm just going to read this question. For distance learning options, how much daily synchronous and asynchronous instruction, what would that look like? This year, asynchronous for K-5 is limited to 2 hours per day. Would that change? What can you maybe talk a little bit to that, Mr. Lehal, or maybe that would have to be Dr. Gatanda?
Why don't I speak to intermediate, because intermediate might have the same question, then I'll let Dr. Gotanda kind of address the elementary portion with times. But with intermediate, this year, the way that we worked was our teachers instructed with a minimum of 50% synchronous instruction. And we worked hard together as a staff to be able to find a healthy balance for our students. With that said, there are times when there needs to be more than 50% synchronous instruction. And in certain classes, that's definitely prevalent. And so the goal is to find a balance between synchronous and asynchronous without compromising any of the education for our students. And so I would go back to that with the staff, where there may be some days where there's more asynchronous time with a particular class, and other days where there's more synchronous.
Dr. Gatanda, would you say that would be the same for elementary school in terms of the way it's different from compared to this year?
Yes, I will say for elementary, I think one of the things that was a learning point for us was instructing young children in groups of 25 or 35 is very challenging. So I do think that there is some merit in talking about what small group looks like, and having perhaps like a whole class meeting and then doing small group instruction, just because virtually for younger children, developmentally, it's harder for them to engage in longer periods of time when they're not able to interact and potentially have some of those physical reminders for them to get back on task or to re-engage or whatever it might be. So I do think that when we were in virtual learning, both the hybrid students at the time and the DLA, that the hybrid students did have like an AM/PM model, so it split the class in half, and then they were able to have some smaller groups, which I think could be more beneficial instructionally. So I do foresee us doing a whole group and then smaller groups throughout the day in order for us to attend to students more individually.
And Dr. Gatanda, this may be a question for you. Has there been any consideration on some kind of temporary independent study for families who maybe don't feel comfortable sending their smaller children back to school who have not had the opportunity to be vaccinated yet? Are there any kind of alternate arrangements that can be made for kids that maybe have not been vaccinated?
Great question. We are really hoping that we're able to do an actual independent study program. And so I think we have to look and see what the numbers are and kind of what that looks like. To do a long-term independent study for a couple of months makes it really difficult to staff, right? And so if we have, let's say, for example, a caseload of students who are only going to do independent study for 2 months, and we have a whole teacher assigned to them when they don't have the students on their caseload anymore, we're still obligated to keep that employee on. And so that makes it very difficult for the district to continue to staff, and it becomes almost fiscally, unfeasible to have something that's a short term. So I think that it's worth a conversation to have. I don't want to say no, but I definitely think that, it's something that we have to kind of look into and just be very savvy about in terms of how we're going to staff it and make sure that we're fiscally responsible.
Dr. Katanda, could you maybe address in classes where COVID infections have been reported, were the classes suspended? Did quarantine take place? How long does that take? Kind of what are the conditions for coming back on campus? How has that been handled this year? And would that be the same protocol going forward?
So great question. So it looked a little bit different at the start of the year than it did towards where we are now. So at the beginning of the school year, basically if there was a class with a COVID positive person, we had to send the entire class home. And then we had to monitor and make sure that the students were quarantining for 10 days as well as the teacher. And then they were monitoring. We suggested everybody got tested. Fast forward to as we learned more about COVID and LA County Department of Public Health updated their guidelines. The COVID mitigation plan now basically states that if there's a COVID positive person, and what we do is we look at those who were within 6 feet of that person for 15 minutes or more are the students who then would quarantine at home for 10 days. We always recommend that, students get tested. We often will say, wait a few days just so that we can get some symptoms or we can allow, that to develop and then get tested. So then we can ensure that, the students who are coming back to school are not COVID positive. We always go in and we disinfect every single day. High touch surfaces are cleaned throughout the day. So things like light switches or bathroom faucets, restroom handles, all of those are cleaned throughout the day. And then the classrooms are disinfected every single day. So there are protocols that have changed over the course of the year. And I really give a lot of credit to our custodians and all of our school site staff because it's changed so much over the time. But that is currently what the COVID mitigation plan is. That being said, those who are fully vaccinated, and fully vaccinated means that they've had the one shot Johnson & Johnson for adults. But if we're talking about Pfizer for students, if they've had their vaccination and it's been more than 2 weeks, those students don't have to quarantine as long as they're not showing symptoms. So, depending, and when we have a COVID positive case, there's a lot of information that we have to fill out and give to the Department of Public Health, and vaccination information is one of them. If we can't obtain vaccination information from a family, then we will assume that the student is not vaccinated.
I almost started talking again and forgot to unmute myself. I'm sorry. Could we, just to clarify, Dr. Gatanda, in terms of independent study, is that an option for elementary kids, school kids to do until they get vaccinated and then join back in the regular school program? Is that a year-long commitment like DLA? Is there an option for like a short-term independent study like there would with pre-COVID vacations? What are the other options in terms of that? Is quite a few questions in here about that.
Right. So I said that was not something that we were considering because the purpose of independent study is really so that, students, it's not about COVID, but that being said, it's worth a conversation to have of what does that look like for a short term. Again, the district has to be very fiscally responsible because if we assign a teacher to students who are only doing it for short term, we are on the hook for that teacher for the salary for the entire year. And so we would have to find something for that teacher to do. So I definitely think it's worth a conversation to have, should we not necessarily have a full K-5 DLA. So I think it's worth a conversation to have. I'm not going to say 100% yes right now, just because, we could run it through the individual school sites, but it would be very, very difficult knowing that the legislation for independent study is going to be very, very tight next year moving forward. So, that being said, we'd have to have probably a set amount of time commitment from families, and it wouldn't just be it's 1 month and I feel like going back to school, because it makes it very difficult to staff that. It makes it very expensive for the school district. And while I do realize that we do have some federal and state funding that is coming in, we also don't want to have employees that aren't working. right? Because their caseload is no longer, on their caseload anymore.
Could we talk about procedures and protocols at lunchtime, recess, drop off, and pickup, like what that looks like at the school sites right now? Mr. Leaholt, I don't know if you'd be able to answer that question, but.
Oh, I can talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Either way.
Mr. Leaholt could probably talk about it too. So our students are, so when they get dropped off, they are doing the screener. So there's a little QR code and there's some questions that families have to answer. And so that is the drop-off procedure. So they have to show the green screen as they're entering the school. Whether or not that screener is going to be required in the fall is to be determined. We've talked a lot with the county about whether or not it's something that parents are really answering truthfully. And if a student is sick, we've asked our parents to keep the children home. So that being said, that's what drop-off looks like. Pickup really looks like the kids get dismissed and they jump in the car just like a normal one. We do ask the students to distance. And then lunchtime and snack are scheduled and the students do sit together, but they are distanced. And so what our schools have done is they've actually created spaces for grade levels to eat together and or play together. So recess and lunchtime play is also, they're playing together now. They weren't before, and people were very upset about it, but it's because we didn't have the proper protocols in order to allow them to play together. But they can play together, but they are separated by grade level.
Great, thank you. Mr. Leaholt, can you talk about student access to things like iReady, other types of apps and platforms that students have? And then as kind of an aside to that, also some of the elementary parents had questions about their students who need to take math placement exams and whether or not their students would still have access to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Students will still have access to all the different types of platforms that their teachers are using. It just depends on what they're using next year. And so well, I'll speak to iReady because that's the first one, and that's kind of a district-wide initiative, if I could say. But right now we're doing the iReady diagnostic. We're actually in the stages of wrapping up the third diagnostic for this year. We'll be continuing to use iReady for math and reading diagnostics next year, and parents will continue to have access to iReady for the lessons that are tied to that. There's lots of other programs and that are supplemental programs that we go through each year for site and board approval. And so those are the types of programs, like, for instance, at elementary, you have things like IXL, there's different programs like Brain Pop, Reading Eggs. It just depends on the year and what's being utilized, but those will continue to be used. And then the math assessments would happen for our fourth graders who want to take that assessment to see if they're going to go into 6XL, and for our fifth graders looking at 6XL. Those assessments would happen in person in the springtime of 2022.
Great, thank you. And again, regarding the deadline, it is June 20th to make this decision, and a parent does that through the ARIES portal. Is that correct, Mr. Leaholt? Could you maybe go over that one more time?
Yeah, let me just see if I can go back a slide here. And so the deadline's June 20th for you to be able to sign up. Everything's done through your parent portal. If you're having any trouble accessing your parent portal, give your main office at your homeschool a call. If you're with me in the DLA, you can contact our office manager, Jennifer Kelly, or you could email me. But basically, you're going to log into your parent portal, and then if you go down that left-hand side, like I had mentioned, you're going to click on Student Info, and then School of Choice Requests, and then there'll be a blue box that pops up. It honestly takes less than 5 minutes to be able to go through it. The application fields are very simple to be able to make your selection. The deadline is June 20th. I would say if you know 100% that you're going to enroll in this program, the sooner you enroll, the better for us to be able to start understanding our numbers and our staffing. But we currently have a deadline of June 20th.
Dr. Gatonda, has there been any consideration of extending that, or are we, the June 20th deadline is where we're at this point because of the staffing for the teacher?
On June 20th, it doesn't close. It's still open, but it's based on space available. So in other words, on June 20th, we have to be able to invite teachers back to work for us if we have teachers who are on contracts who, potentially could be looking for employment elsewhere. I'm sure everybody knows there's a teacher shortage. So, we want to try to, retain our teachers who are new to us that may not have, tenure in our district just yet. But it will be open beyond the 20th. It's just going to be dependent upon space.
Great, thank you. There's a question about grades and report cards. So I'm just going to read it to you directly. Will grades and report cards received by a DLA student be at the same level as in-person students at the same grade level? Will DLA students be at any disadvantage for being in that program?
No, they won't be at any disadvantage. And so it's no to the second part of the question, and it's a yes, I believe, to the first part of the question. The quality of the education through DLA will mimic the education that you would have through your homeschool with in-person learning, but it'll be done in a virtual format. There's two things that I care about, and that's taking care of kids and providing an exceptional education. And so when we move forward into this type of when you move forward into a virtual platform, we're taking the same curriculum, we just have a different delivery model for it. And so it'll be a high quality education, and then the grades will, and the grades reflected will be that of a PVPUSD school.
Great, thank you. Those are all the questions that I see in the chat. Is there anything else that either of you have that I missed? I'm looking back over my notes because I do have all the questions that were submitted in advance. So I think that's mostly everything. Mr. Leholt, was there any closing information that you wanted to give us?
Yeah, just if you are, if you're interested in this program and you're thinking about it over the evening and you continue to have any additional questions, there is a long list of FAQs that are posted on the PVPUSD website. I encourage you to look through those. They are broken down into certain categories. So as you get into those FAQs, if you look on the right-hand side, you're able to toggle through kind of different head topics. And then if you do have questions, you can feel free to email me directly at my email, which is my last name, Lehault, and then the letter M as in Michael at pvpusd.net. And we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have, because I know sometimes things come up outside of this. In addition to that, this is being recorded, and so you can always go back if there's certain slides that you wanted to take a look at. And then just lastly, just kind of a big thank you for the past year, especially the parents who've been in the DLA. You guys have been extremely supportive, and just on behalf of myself and our staff, just to thank you guys for putting your trust in us this last year. Having over 700 students in a virtual platform has been a really exciting experience, and again, thank you for your trust in that.
Great, thank you. And we will get this presentation posted on our district website as soon as it is ready that we can download it off of our Zoom webinar. And so we will get it posted as soon as we can. So thank you for joining us this evening, and I will turn it over to Dr. Gatonda for some final words.
Great. Thank you so much. And just so as parents are making this decision, I do hear that there's a strong desire for there to be a short-term independent study option. So we will look at what that can look like. I can't promise that we're going to be able to make that happen, because again, this does come down to making sure that we have teachers to teach students. And then if they don't have students, I need to make sure I have something for that teacher to do. I can't imagine that anybody wants to have, tax dollars spent on somebody who doesn't have a job, every day, but is getting paid. So I think that is a piece that we are going to have to look at. But for those of you who are considering, should I send my child back to school and is it safe? I will will suggest that you look at our PVPUSD COVID-19 information page. So there's an entire web page that's dedicated to COVID-19 safety protocols. You can look at the dashboard, you can look at all the resources that are there so that you're able to make an informed decision around what the protocols are that are happening in classrooms and our school sites. So again, I can share that there have not been a lot of linked cases. I mean, in just this entire year. And, you know, there's data out there that also shows outside of PVPUSD, you know, other districts are not seeing a lot of transmission that is linked in the school sites. Most of it is traced back to, you know, whether it's, you know, outside engagements or sports or whatever it might be. So, you know, I do encourage everybody to kind of look at that. And again, while we're setting a guaranteed deadline of June 20th, we definitely, you know, we'll have the window open beyond that. So families who are making that change, you know, who want to make that change later on, we will have that window open. So great. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And again, we will be posting this as well as our FAQs that are there. And Mr. Lehold is a fantastic contact if you have any questions.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.